Welcome to HortTube. My name is Jim Putnam. This is the Sunday garden question and answer video I do most Sundays of the month. The first Sunday of the month, I do a subscriber Sunday video where subscribers send in photos of things in their yard that they're proud of. The email address to send in photos is right here. Just title the email subscriber photos or something like that. And like I say, the rest of the Sundays I do a question and answer video. You can ask questions down below this video and I will pick from those next week to answer. If I'm not answering a question, it may be that I've answered it several times in the past, and there's a playlist on my channel. I'll link it up here in the corner if you're watching on YouTube of all the question and answer videos I've ever done. And there's a lot of them at this point, probably. I don't know how many. There's a lot. I had a pretty productive week out here. I don't know if you guys saw the Wednesday update video, but I did sod this spot that I'm standing on right now. Holly approves. It's not tall enough for her to try to eat it yet, but she does approve of the space, and she likes to come out here and just lay down. I think its grass is much cooler, especially when the shade kind of overtakes it in the late afternoon. I've started on drip irrigation. That will be in the Wednesday update video this week. And I've started editing a lot of the videos that I had in while I was along the Gulf Coast that I haven't put up yet. And I think tomorrow's I'll have one from the LSU Ag Center. Super interesting place where they do a lot of trialing for lots of the plant brands that you guys shop for when you go to the box stores and garden centers and that kind of thing. So just a super interesting place. It's like it's a zone 8B, almost 9, and it's kind of the stress test place for heat. If you're trying to introduce a new plant, you want to know how tough it really is. You send it down to the Gulf Coast there and southern Alabama or southern Louisiana. So anyway, that video will be up tomorrow, and several other things this week. So let's go ahead and get started on the questions I got from last week with Subscriber Sunday. So a lot of these questions are from 2 weeks ago, and a couple or 3 or 4 from last week's video. Okay, somebody asked me if they cut their limelight hydrangeas, these hydrangea paniculatas, the white ones that you see back here. I think you can see them. These are white wedding hydrangeas, but they're hydrangea paniculatas as well. They want to know if they could cut them as these blooms fade, would they rebloom again? They will put on new growth, and it's possible that they'll set buds. They'd probably be smaller than these. It's a little late at this point. I actually cut all my hydrangea paniculatas at the nursery sometime around May 15th or so every year. They would leaf out in mid-April from me, and then by mid-May, they would have put on a lot of growth. I'd cut them, and I was trying to slow down the bloom on them because I didn't want them to bloom in the middle of summer and then try to sell them in my garden center when I didn't have customers. So I tried to slow them down and get them to bloom a little later every year. And I thought the blooms lasted longer too if they were later in the summer when the sun was on a slightly lower angle. So you have the possibility of delaying them. And you also have, like I say, you could probably cut them and have them flush out. They bloom on new growth. It's possible that you would get a second round of flowers toward fall, but I would imagine they would be quite a bit smaller. Okay, let's see. Somebody said their Rebecchias laying down, or the black-eyed Susans or coneflowers, whatever, are laying down. It's likely not enough sun. I do have a couple that are flopped over back here that some storms worked on, a little wind and rain, and they're just really not getting enough sun. They're just not sturdy enough. They're getting plenty of sun to grow. They're getting plenty of sun to bloom, but it leaves them just stretched enough that any wind or rain or any kind of weather is going to flop them over a little bit. That's true of a lot of the flowering things that I have in this backyard. It's a lot of sun back here, but when we're talking full sun for a perennial like that, that thing wants 6 or 8 hours of just being pounded by the sun. And I'm not getting that back here. I'm getting maybe 3 hours of that. So that's likely what it is, which is really honestly no big deal, but it will likely happen year over year. Somebody asked me, they bought a Chinese fringe tree and realized took it out of the pot and realized somewhere in the middle of that there's some white netting in it. I would imagine those were those little seed starting pods. The expandable peat pots or peat pellets have that white netting around them, and so the grower may have actually propagated that tree in that netting, in one of those peat pots with the netting around it. It's supposed to break down. Surprised that it hasn't done it already. I don't know how big the tree you got was, but that netting that's in that pot is likely from a peat pot. Can't imagine what else it would be from. But if you ever use those little thin peat pots, when they expand, what's holding them together is a little white netting around them. Okay, somebody asked me, they have a neighbor that said they got a white plant that blooms at night, and they called it a moon plant, and wanted to know information about it. That's either a moon vine, which is like, what's that, Epimea alba. If it's a vining plant, it's a moon vine. I think those are hardy in like zone 9 to 11, but people use them as annuals well north of that. But in the deep south, you can, it's a real tropical. But if it's a vining plant, it's a moon vine. If it's a more shrubby thing, there is a datura that people call moonflower, and it's more of a shrubby thing. If it's that datura, you'll see grown as an annual, across the entire country. I think it can even be done by seed, but it's hardy in like zone 8. I think it's a little bit south of me, those datura. But if it's like I say, if it's shrubby, it's a datura. If it's vining, it's Ipamea. That datura I know is, I think it's pretty poisonous. I don't know if you got anything chewing on anything. If you want to use that, people ask me all the time. I do have some things back here that are poisonous. I've got a dog that just doesn't pay any attention to anything. I mean, no plants. She doesn't chew on anything. So I don't really, not something I think about. But if you have a dog that does, I think that's a particularly dangerous one. Is that datura, and it's in that's a Solanaceae family. That tomato, family is got a lot of poisonous plants in it. Okay, so let's see. Somebody asked me if I foliar fed my annuals, and I guess that would be something like Miracle Grow is what they're asking about. I don't, not at all. And I talked about it in my container planting video. A lot of people do, and you watch YouTube videos about people's annual pots, they're gonna tell you that that's what they're doing. I fertilize my containers with a slow release fertilizer when I plant them in the spring, and then about now, mid-July or so, I'll come back and do it again. And that could be with an organic, which is what I'll do, like a spoma product of some kind, just twice a year in a container, or you could do whatever slow release fertilizer that you want to buy. I just find it easier, and I don't push my containers. All of my containers look fantastic. I just don't. I find that if pushing things that just constant pushing of plants tends to cause disease and insect problems that I don't get otherwise by allowing things to grow slow and steady. And a lot of that comes from my experience in the nursery business. If you plant 500 of the same thing in straight rows and try to grow them as fast as possible, you'll find out how many disease and insect problems you can actually get, by pushing and pushing. Like I say, I'm on the outside looking in on the foliar feeding annual baskets and annual flowers all summer long. I realize that, but my philosophy is slow and steady growth. I don't want to have to be repotting them in the middle of summer. I don't want to be watering them that much, honestly. So, I don't want to be in a situation where I'm having to water my hanging baskets twice a day because, I'm pushing them and pushing them and pushing them. So, okay, there you go. Okay. Somebody asked me, I've got a white beautyberry that I brought back from the Gulf Coast, which is not an uncommon plant. The one I have is because it's a new variety. It's upright variety. It won't be as weepy or as spready as some of the others, but wanted to know if I'll do a video on that, and I will. I definitely will, especially as those berries color up in the fall. I haven't planted it yet. It's still on my driveway. That's a native plant to the southeast, and it's a white berrying version of it. Okay, let's see. Somebody wanted to know what things to grow under an oak, super greedy oak that's on a slight slope, and it's just a desert underneath it. That can be tough. I think a lot of people would probably go and plant, ground covers under it. And I'm not a huge fan of things that crawl across the ground and, can become other issues later. Things like what we'll be talking about here, vinca or pachysandra or ivy or, maybe I would plant a juga. A juga wouldn't be too aggressive. That may be a good choice for you. Hosta does a great job of competing. It's amazing to me how much a hosta can compete with an existing plant. I would consider, if it's a desert under that tree, in the fall when the leaves fall on that thing, actually grinding them up. You can get up. I bought a really inexpensive leaf grinder last year. I think I showed it on the channel here when I was cleaning up this yard. That you can grind all those leaves up and start composting them under that tree and try to improve that soil. Maybe slow the water down on the slope a little bit. The tree would probably be very, very happy by that, but you may find that you can improve the soil under there enough to start actually planting under there, and just use it as a place to compost, all your leaf mold every fall, and actually look better, obviously, under there. But hosta will compete, ajuga will compete, and not be super, super aggressive. It might be that you could try heucheras and heucherellas and tiarellas under there, because I have a hard time growing heucheras in this place is so flat. I've got some shade back across the back line, but they don't. A little bit of slope and heuchera grows quite a bit better. So maybe try those as well. If you're in the southeast, dwarf yaupon hollies will compete with anything. It's a native holly, but it's a dwarf version of it. I had those under an oak at my old house. They only get about 2.5 feet tall, but that's a dwarf yaupon holly. Okay. Somebody asked me about drip irrigation supplies, where to get them, and that kind of thing. In my store, listed below every single video, I have all the drip irrigation supplies that I've used in previous videos. They wanted to know where to learn about drip irrigation. I have a series of drip irrigation videos on this channel, really basic components, just basic component ones. But like I said in the beginning of this video, I'm in the process of putting it in everywhere here, and those videos will be up in the next few weeks. I will say that I recommend to folks when I'm doing consultation work and that kind of thing, act like Joe's landscaper and go over to a supply house that's local to you. There's definitely somewhere in your area, there's a landscaper supply house that has irrigation products, and those folks will probably be helpful as well, because it can be kind of costly to cover, as much as I'm covering out here. It's hundreds and hundreds of dollars. They're little teeny tiny parts that don't cost that much, but if you're covering 2/10 of an acre in drip irrigation, it's going to add up into the hundreds of dollars. So you might be able to save too by going to a landscaper supply house. Okay, let's see. Somebody asked me about, they have a holly that is dying. Every time I say holly, I wonder if she thinks I'm talking about her on camera. They have a holly that's dying limb by limb, and if it's like compacta hollies, the little leaf hollies, they do that. I have decided that what's actually happening with helleri hollies and sky pencil hollies and compacta hollies that are older that start dying limb from limb is that the roots weren't broken up very good by the whoever planted them originally. They get super root bound in the container, and I think the roots just continued to wrap around, and what happens is eventually they choke one another out and they start dying limb by limb. But that's what I've always thought is going on there. I see it on especially houses that are maybe 4, 5, 6, 7 years old, where the builders just slap 7 hollies across the front of the foundation. That about that time you'll start to see one branch die here or there. I think they were just popped out of the pot and thrown in the ground as quick as somebody could get the job done. Okay, so another thing about breaking roots up when you put them in the ground, because that's what could eventually happen, is that the roots, it's not just about them going in a circle and having a hard time getting water and nutrients out in the surrounding soil. It's also about those roots, like a circulatory system in your body. Certain things control different things above the ground, and so if the roots are down below ground killing one another, they're going to be taking out parts of the top of the plant as well. Okay, somebody asked me if it was safe to plant immediately after they took out some sick Leyland cypress. I would say that yes. I think your biggest problem is going to be whether or not you're actually removing them well enough to plant, meaning that are there going to be roots all over the place, because big Leyland cypress have big giant roots on them. They're not anchored very well. They fall over all the time because the roots are right on top of the ground, but they can be hard to dig around. So if the stumps are coming out, yes, you can just plant right behind them. That disease isn't going to pass over to the leafy evergreen things that you listed that you're planting, like ligustrum and Elaeagnus or whatever else, hollies, I think was on the list of things you were considering planting. The leyland's not going to contaminate those things, but it could be hard to dig around in that area. Okay, somebody asked me, this is a good question, the difference between plant zones. When we're talking about the hardiness zone map, and I'm in zone 7B, and if you don't know what the hardiness zone map is, you can look up on, just go to Google, put in your zip code and say hardiness zone. And I think that, I think the camera's trying to focus on holly behind me. Look up your hardiness zone that you live in, and then you'll know more of what I'm talking about. The country is divided into increments of 10 degrees cold, average cold in the wintertime. So I'm in zone 7B. Our average low temperature, well, I'm in zone, let's say zone 7. Our average low temperature is 0. So historically, the lowest temperature we have on average is 0 degrees. In zone 6, it's like -10. In zone 5, it's -20. So, and then below me in zone 8, it's like 10. But then it was later divided into increments of 5. So that's how you get 7A and 7B. Instead of 0, I'm actually, our average low is 5. Okay, so that's the hardiness zone map. Then, but it's so weird. It's like the only thing we determine as to whether a plant will grow in our area or not is whether or not how cold it gets. But that doesn't, there's a lot more that goes into this than just cold. Obviously, heat becomes an issue when we're in the southeast, and places in the Midwest too. Places like Oklahoma get, you know, over 100 degrees for a good portion of the summer. It's super hot there, and it eliminates lots of things that we can grow in other places. So their question was, what's the difference between zone 8B in the Pacific Northwest and zone 8B in the southeast? And that difference is really daytime heat. And so you're going to see some things that will grow there that will, you know, San Francisco amazes me. I mean, people have tropical plants outside in containers right next to temperate plants. The one thing that you can't get sometimes, though, in those temperate areas is it actually doesn't get cold enough for some things. And so we may have some plants here in the southeast that need a little more cold, because we do get some more cold here as well. And so I see plants in the Pacific Northwest, like conifers, can grow in zone 8B in the Pacific Northwest, that in zone 8B in the southeast, the humidity and the heat would just melt them during the summertime. But then I see things probably in the southeast that require some cold treatment in the winter that perhaps you're not getting cold enough either, because their temperature span is just very narrow. It doesn't get that cold and it doesn't get that hot. Here we get some of both. And not real cold, but cold enough to cold treat some things. But anyway, that's the difference. So the horticultural zone map is a good starting place for figuring out what you can grow in your area, but it's not, you know, it doesn't take into account summer, which is the time of year we're actually outside enjoying our gardens. So that's the difference. Okay, somebody asked me if I was going to plant Pieris, japonica, and rhododendrons in this yard. I already planted a Pieris back there. It's in one of the earlier update videos. And definitely I'll plant some more rhododendrons out here. There are some more heat tolerant rhododendrons now. There is a video on my channel about planting rhododendrons that I planted at the old house, if you want to take a look at that video. I'll have to do the same thing here. This is super flat. And so I got two things going against me with rhododendrons. It's definitely hotter than they want to be. And root rot can be an issue with them. So I got to definitely mound them up, and I got to look for heat tolerant varieties. But I have already planted Pieris. I've got a perfect spot along that back line. Pieris also wants to be mounded up here a little bit in this clay soil. And then the last question for this week, somebody asked me about, they continually try to transplant dogwoods and redbuds out of the woods and they die. They are really difficult, the ones that come up from seed in the ground, to transplant. They also said they were good at propagation, so I would consider, if I were you, actually just trying to root them. You can, or doing them from seed. Redbuds are super interesting. I think you can read about it online, how to do it. You actually have to boil the seed. The seed has a super industrial coating on it. This is a redbud seed. Redbuds are in the pea family, and so I'll get this close enough to me. Are in the pea family, so it looks like a pea pod. You have to take the seeds out of the seed. You have to take the seeds out of the seed. You have to take the seeds out of the seed. You have to take the seeds out of the seed. You have to take the seeds out of the seed. You have to take the seeds out of the seed. You have to take the seeds out of the seed. You have to take the seeds out of the seed. You have to take the seeds out of the seed. You have to take the seeds out of the seed. You have to take the seeds out of the seed. You have to take the seeds out of the seed. You have to take the seeds out of the seed. You have to take the seeds out of the seed. You have to take the seeds out of the seed. You have to take the seeds out of the seed. You have to take the seeds out of the seed. You have to take the seeds out of the seed. You have to take the seeds out of the seed. You have to take the seeds out of the seed. You have to take the seeds out of the seed. You have to take the seeds out of the seed. You have to take the seeds out of the seed. You have to take the seeds out of the seed. You have to take the seeds out of the seed. You have to take the seeds out of the seed. You have to take the seeds out of the seed. You have to take the seeds out of the seed. You have to take the seeds out of the se out of here. There's a red bud behind me, just loaded with seeds back here. But you have to take the seeds out, and then you have to boil them for like a minute, and then you have to cold treat them in the refrigerator. But then they come up fairly readily from that. You can collect dogwood seeds in the fall, and then you have to cold treat them in the winter, in the refrigerator during the winter as well. And then they'll come up. Weirdly, if they come up from seed in a pot, they're pretty easily transplantable to the ground, whereas for whatever reason, and I think it's probably just because they initially have a taproot that might run some other direction. And we're just not getting it all. We think we're digging it all out of the ground, but we're not digging it all out of the ground, is the problem. But both red buds and dogwoods can be done from seed, and it's an interesting process to cold treat them, and to in the case of the red buds, you've got to get that outer coating broken on it, and you do that by boiling it. That's one technique. Other people, I think, use knives to just scar them. There's a lot of different techniques, but anyway, I think that would be a better strategy would be to go collect the seed instead of the actual plants. So thank you very much for following along with these question and answer videos, and ask questions down below, and I'll be back next Sunday with another one of these.